Hey everyone, welcome back to the workshop. My name is John with Just a Nazarene Leather Company, and this is the business side, where I share insight into how to start and run your own leather business. Today we are continuing on with the theme of how to price your leather work. There's already been several videos, I believe 3 of them, that go over various spreadsheets that I offer of how to get a price for an individual leather item. There have been 2 additional videos specifically on calculating the cost of leather. All right, so there's a part 1 and a part 2. Something we haven't discussed though is how to price the rest of your items. So things like hardware, thread, and we're going to pay special attention to more irregular items today, like leather dyes, adhesives, edge coats, maybe even some beeswax. How do you price this out if you use beeswax for your edges? We're going to talk about all of that, but before we dive into the specifics, there is a general rule that you'll notice on the spreadsheet. You really need 2 different numbers to calculate the price for the different materials that are in your product, all right? You need to know the price per unit and the number of units. So everything we talk about today, all right, even stuff we talked about with the leather videos, it all breaks down to those 2 numbers, the price per unit and the number of units. That's what we're going to try to get and find for all of these different things. So let's get started with the easy stuff, which is hardware and thread. All right, let's start with hardware. We have to get a price per unit and the number of units, okay? The price per unit can vary depending on the type of hardware because some are sold as single units and others are sold as units of 100, sometimes 10, sometimes 6, sometimes 1,000. It depends on what hardware that you're getting. So if it's a single item, very easy. Get the total price that it cost you. That's not just the price that's listed on the website or in the store. You need to include extortion, tax, and or shipping if you're having to bring this stuff in, all right, and have it shipped to you and you're not going to an actual store. Whatever that total price is for your hardware, that is the price that you're going to use to do some calculations. Now, if it's sold as a single item, then the price per unit is just whatever the price you paid for this one item. All right, this is from Tandy. I have a local Tandy. I can walk in. I don't have to pay shipping for this. And I don't remember how much. It's a couple bucks, I think. And in Memphis, Tennessee, we've got around a 10% tax rate all in. And so about $3.30, all right, divided by 1, which my price per unit then is $3.30. All right, I'm making that up. I don't know if this is actually a $3 item. It might be. And so if I use 3 of these in a project, then my price per unit is $3.30. My units is 3, and so it multiplies across, and it's almost 10 bucks just this piece of hardware for a particular project. All right, that's easy when it's sold as a single item. If you have hardware that is sold as more than one item, this is 100 double cap rivets that are wide, and these are large. So again, whatever the price is, all right, the base price plus tax plus shipping, if you get that shipped in, that total price divided by 100. That is my price per unit. If then I use 5 of the rivets in a project, I would multiply that price per unit by the number of units I used in a project. Super simple with hardware. You count it up, take the whole price divided by the number of units in the pack as you buy it, and then simply multiply by the number of units in your product. Let's move on to thread. Thread is similar to hardware, but the units are a little bit different. All right, here in the US, we buy things typically in yards or feet. However, different things that you buy, depending on where you source it from, could be in meters. And so you might need to do a little bit of conversion there. So I have found what I use for my thread, because we're trying to get a price per unit and the number of units. The unit that I use for thread is feet. Okay, you could use inches, meters, I guess, if you're not in the US. That seems pretty big though as a base unit, but you can absolutely use that. So most thread is sold to you. You can see in the description of the products, or even in the product names, the length that these different things are brand new. So these little waxed braided cords, this isn't a new spool, but these spools I believe are 25-yard spools, so 75 feet. And you buy them one at a time. I actually have one here. All right, so this is how I would buy one of these spools. So whatever this costs me, the price plus tax plus shipping, if I have to get it shipped in, divided by 75. That's my price per unit for the thread. And then however many feet that I use for a given project, that is the number of units that I use. Now, when it comes to thread, when you're trying to get the number of units, you can't just measure straight line distance, because whether you hand stitch or use a machine to stitch, there are two lengths of thread going in both sides. All right, so not only do you have a top stitch, a bottom stitch, all right, you actually have to incorporate the thickness of the leather pieces that you're going through. That's all part of the length that you need to take into consideration for trying to figure out the number of feet that you use. So as a general rule, whether it's machine stitch or hand stitched, what I found from advice that I found on the interwebs as I was learning, and just from practical experience myself actually doing things, a good rule of thumb for the length of thread that you need is whatever the straight line distance is of where you're stitching, multiply that times 4. Okay, as far as the amount of thread that you're actually going to use. That'll cover your top stitch, your back stitch, plus the thickness of the leather going through, and still give you a little bit left over for your working ends with the needles with the hand stitch, or the straggly pieces off the machine that you have to snip off anyway. All right, so whatever straight line distance that you need to stitch, multiply that times 4, and that's a good indication as far as the number of feet or inches or meters that you need to account for. So price per unit, total price divided by the length, and then to get the length you actually use in a project, straight line distance times 4. All right, so price per unit, straight line distance times 4, put those numbers in the spreadsheet and it'll spit out a cost for you. However, we are not done, because there are other types of thread that are not sold by the length. At least if you buy one of these 8-ounce spools of thread for a machine from, let's just say, Tandy, Tandy doesn't do you the courtesy of telling you how long this is. Jerks. I'm just kidding. But seriously, this is an 8-ounce spool. So you might be thinking, oh, 8 ounces, cool. We'll just price things per ounce. Do you realize how much of this you have to use to get a full ounce? Well, I guess whatever 1/8 of this total length is. But we don't know what that is. And it's going to take a long time for us to put this on a scale and figure out what that is, and that's going to be an impractical number to use for pricing. So if you simply go to the Google, you can find out exactly how long whatever weight spool of thread is for whatever size you are looking up. So for example, this is a size 207 nylon bonded thread. So if I wanted to look up an 8-ounce, what is the length of an 8-ounce nylon thread size 207, I find online that it is about 1,000 yards of thread that's on here. That's 3,000 feet. So now that I know that distance, I can then take my price for this thing, price plus tax plus shipping if I have to get it shipped in, and divide it by 3,000. That'll get my price per foot, all right, which is going to be pretty darn cheap. All right, that's a lot of thread. But then as I use my project, sew it up on the machine, whatever distance, whether it's a curve or straight line that I'm sewing up on there, that straight line distance times 4. All right, so you may run into stuff like this where the supplier doesn't tell you the length. Other suppliers do, and so search the interwebs and you'll be able to find that. All right, let's move on to the more difficult things. Let's talk about any type of liquid. All right, so that's a dye, that's an adhesive, that's edge work, any of that kind of stuff. This is really the crux of where I want to spend the most time in this video to show you how I price these things out. This next method we're going to be talking about will apply to any type of liquid supply that you're going to be using. And these can be the most challenging because they're not sold as individual units, or you don't use them as individual units like you do hardware or leather that you can figure out. These are liquids. Sometimes you just might need a little bit of glue to tack something into place to hold it while you stitch it. Other times you might be bonding two entire whole sides of leather together. Don't know why you do that, but you may have to cover a larger surface area with contact cement. You might be dyeing just a small item, or you might have to dye large amounts of stuff. There are differing amounts of dye in these liquid products that you'll be using, so we need to know how to price them. So let me get the stuff out of the way. The best way to get the most accurate price per unit is to have a brand new one of those items. So I have a 5 beans pro dye dark brown, and you're going to need some type of kitchen scale. All right, so this is just a cheap one from Amazon. I would recommend that the unit you use for this is grams. I realize that milliliters is printed right there, but that's just the volume of the liquid inside. All right. That doesn't account for the container here. And so unless you want to be pouring all of this out of the container every time you go to do stuff like this and actually measure how much you use for a project, it's easier just to go with grams. This is a 32 ounce bottle, so I'm not going with ounces because sometimes I don't use anywhere close to an entire ounce of dye, especially if I'm just working stuff around the edges. I might put that dye in a pen like this, all right, or in a marker like that, and just use that on the edges. I don't get anywhere close to an ounce when I use this most of the time. So I want to go with a smaller unit, which is grams. Now, is it impossible to do this if you don't have a brand new item? No. You just may not be as accurate to start with, all right? But there's a couple ways around that, so you don't have to go buy a brand new item of every type of supply that you use. Use the internet, all right? Try and find the different weights of different items that you have. If nothing else, go with what's printed on the bottle. All right, like I said, it's not going to include the container itself, but whether that's a 32 ounce, a 4 ounce, I think this is, yeah, that's a 32 ounce. Also, what is this? This is 4 ounce. All right, so 4, 8, 32, those seem to be standard. You can convert those ounces to grams and then use that to figure out your price. And then whenever you do get around to buying new items, you can always go back and improve the measurements that you have. So start with what you've got. You can start with what is printed on here. Use a computer or your phone, do some conversions, and you can get the number of grams that come in a full container, even if you don't actually have a full one. Another thing you could do, if you got a scale and you had something like a local Tandy and such that you could go into, I guarantee you, if you take this kitchen scale in there, they will let you weigh things and write down what the weights of different brand new items are. All right, the folks at Tandy, at least where I'm at, they're awesome. All right, so that's another way that you could get the weights of these things. But I do have a brand new item, so what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to remove the shipping plastic, and there may be another piece of paper closure on the top, so I'll open up that cap and see. So stand by. That's the first thing. Get this thing completely open. And yes, there is a covering on here. So I'm going to cut that out and we'll be good to go. There we go. That is gone. I did not use gloves. Yes, I'm a professional. Anyway, once you get your brand new item to this point, and I realize if you go into Tandy and get it, you won't be able to take that thing off underneath. It's okay. It's not the end of the world. I just want to try and be as accurate as possible. So I am going to turn this on. I've already got it set for grams, and then I will simply put a brand new item with the packaging taken off, and that is 893 grams. Don't know how well you can see that. That says 946 milliliters. All right. So milliliters and grams are not the same thing unless we're talking about water. Fun fact. But this is not water. This is a flammable explosive liquid. And so milliliters and grams are not the same. I recommend getting grams. Now that I have my unit here, keep in mind the goal is we are trying to figure out the price per unit. So get the price of this plus the tax plus the shipping. Shipping is probably a little bit higher if you get the stuff mailed in. This one I did have shipped. That's part of the reason why it was taped. And so that total price divided by the number of grams, that will get you your price per gram. And then here's the way that you figure it out. Once you have that, you no longer need a brand new item. You only need the brand new item to figure out the price per unit. Now once you know the price per unit, the way that you figure out the number of units you use for a project is whatever method that you administer your liquid. All right, so whether I take this dark brown dye and fill up this marker and I use it this way, or whether I stick a dauber into the container and use it that way, whatever container you're going to be using this stuff from, you need to weigh that before your project starts. So this settled out to 52 grams. Go and do your project and then weigh this again afterwards. And let's just say it went down to 50 grams after I was done using it. 52 minus 50 gives me a difference of 2 grams. So that would be the number of units that I would use. And this will work, like I said, for any type of liquid. Getting a brand new one or estimating the best you can based on what is printed. All right, take the total price, divide it by that many grams, that gets you your price per unit. And then as you use an item and you're specifically trying to price something out, be sure, pull out your scale, find out the number of grams that your container is before you start, measure it, find out the number of grams after you're done, subtract those two, that's the number of units that you use, and that's what you should put into the spreadsheet. All right, so that's the way I do it. We're going to talk about one more thing, which is beeswax. You could do beeswax the exact same way that I showed you how to do the liquids, all right? But for something this small, all right, if you got a brand new one, all right, this is 1 ounce. This one's not been used. That is about 26 grams. Oh, now it just jumped up to 28 for reasons. When I put this one on that's used, this is now 24 grams. I have used this quite a lot. All right, this is gonna run you $4 to $5 ish, maybe $4 to $6, depending on where you get it from. And then you're gonna divide that $5 or $6 by 28. That's gonna be a pretty high price per gram. It's gonna take you a long time to use a gram of this. I've used this for dozens of projects, and I'm only down 4 grams. So how do you price something like this? Well, you can do what you want, but I throw in a penny. Whenever I use this thing, I throw in 1 penny on my sheet and include that in my price. So there you go. That is my advice for beeswax. Now, if you are melting pounds of beeswax and putting that onto leather and such, like I do for my belts and things like that, any of my veg tan stuff for outdoors is coated in wax. Like I brush that on. You would use the same method as you do for the liquids. Get your price from the start, your price per unit, and then weigh your container of wax before and after. All right, let's turn the camera around and we will close this thing out. So those were my methods of how I price different supplies and materials for my items. We covered hardware, we covered thread, we covered irregular items like any type of liquid, and then we closed out with beeswax. Just throw in a penny there. Bottom line, every bit of what we're doing as far as calculating the prices really comes down to two different numbers. First, that is your price per unit. For leather, that is your price per square foot. I have videos about that. We covered how to get price per unit for hardware, all right, which is just the price divided by the number of items you buy in a pack. Price per unit is the price per foot that I use for threads. And then I do price per gram for liquids of all kinds. And then I just throw in a penny anytime I need to work on edges with the beeswax. And that's how I price my different things. So that is my price per unit. And then the number of pieces of hardware that you use, the number of feet that you use, which is straight line distance, times 4, all right? That's the number of units for thread. For liquid, it's the number of grams. You gotta weigh it before and after your project with a little kitchen scale, all right? And then typically, I always just throw in just 1 unit of beeswax. If it's something like my shofar sling, where there's 4 pieces and 2 of them are really long straps I'm doing the edge work, I might throw in 2 or 3 pennies, all right? I don't recall exactly how much I put for that, but just be sure to throw in a little bit because you did pay for it. And yeah, that's how I price things. If I forgot something, left something out, if there's another specialty item that you can think of that I didn't cover in this video, put it in the comments below. If you are new to Just Nazarene Leather Company and you are not subscribed, I would humbly ask you to hit that subscribe button for more content like this. Give the video a like, share it out with someone who's a leather worker that may be interested in this type of content. And if you would like to, I do have a membership where I offer exclusive business side content where we go way in depth, way more than what we do in the public business side videos to help you develop a leather business of your own. All right, so thank you so much for joining me in the workshop again today. My name is John with Just Nazarene Leather Company. Go with confidence. Bye now. Thank you so much for watching this business side video. To make sure you get access to all the business side content, become a channel member at the master level. Link below.